Most of you know us as Quakers, but our real name is the Religious Society of Friends. And the term "speak truth to power" is attributed to Quaker civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, who influenced Martin Luther King and many others. A great recent example of speaking truth to power was tonight's speaker, Medea Benjamin, confronting the Reagan-era vampire, Elliot Abrams. He is now returned from the crypt as U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela when he testified before the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee hearing on Venezuela recently, and that was very, very impressive. When the U.S. desires regime change, we don't use Facebook, but we send in the Marines or the CIA. See Chile, Congo, Grenada, the Dominican Republic, and now perhaps Venezuela. Fortunately, we have Ms. Benjamin, Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman, the spirit of Howard Zinn, and other heroes who won't let things go by that easily.
I think everybody's here because we know who she is and the wonderful work she's done. And I think setting, a really tremendous example for people around the country and all over the world about how you can do politics in a humanitarian way. And I was saying to her earlier when she spoke at my campus, what was just great about it was that she talked to students in a very normal, ordinary way that they could hear. And I think that's been one of your great contributions, not just your willingness to go to jail, not just your willingness to travel, but your ability to make politics and international issues human-sized for people. And to me, there's so many occasions where you just showed up and disrupted things, but disrupted that in a very constructive way.
I wanted to move on to talk about where I see the Trump administration in terms of the war and peace issues. I want to talk about some of the things that are getting worse. Israel-Palestine, I would say getting worse. Maybe we could talk about some of the ways that this Trump administration is even closer to the Israeli government than past administrations, and some of the things that they have done to make the situation even more intractable. Recognizing all of Jerusalem as belonging to Israel. Somebody said, a Republican congressperson said today, if you want to dispute that Jerusalem belongs to Israel, go talk to God.
Do every day.
The Golan Heights. Done, we talk about Russia interfering in our elections, and here Trump has made it a gift to Netanyahu for his election campaign to say the U.S. would recognize the Golan Heights. Moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, cutting the money for refugees, closing down the Palestinian Authority office in Washington, D.C., no peep about the illegality of continued settlements, total cover for Israel at the United Nations, and then this crazy talk that Jared Kushner is going to come out with a peace plan. So we are eagerly awaiting that peace plan, right? A peace plan that the Palestinians have already said, if he even comes out with it, it's dead on arrival. And the Arab countries are saying dead on arrival. So that is something that is getting worse, and we know just in the last couple of days, the Israelis pounding Gaza once again. Other places that are getting worse, I think, are the two countries that I mentioned as big oil producers, and very, very worrisome situation. The case of Venezuela. We should all be extremely worried about Venezuela right now. Some of us know that there has been in the past And in fact, we talked about it as the silver lining with all the horrible things going on in the Middle East, is that there was this pink tide in Latin America, and all these progressive governments coming to power in Brazil and Argentina and Bolivia and Ecuador and Venezuela. And it was really exciting to see the kind of movement and the way that they were coming together to share resources and to defy the United States. The U.S. never wanted the Venezuelan revolution to succeed, never wanted Hugo Chavez to succeed, always was looking for a way to sabotage that government, including supporting the 2002 coup. And yes, the Venezuelan government has made lots of terrible economic mistakes. The Venezuelan government is very heavy-handed, and there are lots of human rights abuses. There are things about the Venezuelan government, just like many, many other governments, including our own, that we should criticize. But that does not give any legitimacy to the United States declaring Juan Guaido, who was never voted by anybody for president, where 6 million people voted for Maduro. It doesn't give the United States any legitimacy to impose economic sanctions that have taken a hard situation and made it infinitely worse on purpose, wanting people to be so miserable that they would rise up against their government. And it certainly doesn't give the U.S. government any legitimacy for any kind of military intervention in Venezuela. So now there were some Russian planes that arrived in Venezuela. The U.S. government, the Trump administration says, you better get out. They are really openly using the terms Monroe Doctrine right now, hearkening back to, what was it, 1812, the Monroe Doctrine, and saying, not in our backyard. Latin America is our backyard. We will determine who is there. And so it's a very dangerous situation with the Russians supporting the Maduro government, the U.S. trying to divide the military in Venezuela, and the only the path that I see the U.S. taking it down is a civil war in Venezuela. And Latin America's had so many years of horrendous wars, including in neighboring Colombia. We can't allow that to happen. And we certainly can't allow any kind of U.S. military intervention. And so I am one of the people that was horrified when I saw the opposition take over the consulate in New York. Did anybody here go there? There was a great protest outside the consulate. And they took over 2 buildings in Washington, D.C. that belonged to the Venezuelan government that were for the military attaché. They just took those buildings over. And they said at a press conference where we were there to disrupt, they said that they were going to take over the Venezuelan embassy. And we thought, my goodness, we can't allow that to happen. And they came out in a paper in Colombia that it was going to be on Wednesday. This was last week. And so we called some people in the Venezuelan embassy and said, can we come and sleep there as part of a people's occupation of the embassy? And they said, sure, come over. So 5 of us went and slept in the embassy, and we called more people came out the next day, and we had a nice crowd inside the embassy. We redecorated the front of the embassy to say this belongs to the elected government of Nicolas Maduro. We put on the windows outside excerpts from the Vienna Convention back in, I think, 1961 that says how inviolable the property of embassies are in whatever is the host country, no matter what's going on between the host country and the country that has the embassy. And we stood our ground for the entire day Wednesday, and they never showed up. So that was good, and now we have an emergency response network in case anybody tries to go in and take over that embassy. We have quite a good number of people who said we will come down immediately, no matter what we're doing, we will come there to protect this embassy, because we know how horrible it would be to let the opposition take over the embassy. The symbolism of it would be just terrible. And it would also force force the Venezuelan government to do the same, which is take over the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. And I pretty much think that if the Venezuelan government did that, the U.S. would consider it an act of war and would go in there. So it's really important, things that you might think are symbolic. They are very, very important. So Venezuela, we have to make sure that our congresspeople are supporting the Sicilian bill. It's H.R. 1004, which is to say no military intervention in Venezuela. And we have to get organized and get people out on the streets. And I would have a continuing protest in front of the consulate that they took over, because really that is not their property.
Who's sponsoring that?
That's built by David Cicilline.
From where?
And he is from Rhode Island. And there are, the last I looked, there were 54 co-sponsors. So it's got quite a good list of co-sponsors, but we need to have a lot more than that. And everybody who's in the Progressive Caucus should certainly be on that. And it's very clear in the legislation. It's not supporting Nicolas Maduro. It's stopping a U.S. intervention. So that's one place. And the other is Iran. So I just got back from Iran. We had a group of 28 people. It was a fantastic trip, very hard to get the visas. You know, you can go to Iran as a tourist. You're allowed from our government to go to Iran, and the Iranians allow you to go. There aren't a lot of groups that go. But we went in a little more difficult way because we went as more of a people-to-people educational kind of thing. And so it was harder to get the Iranians to give us the visas. They really carefully checked who was going and everything. But finally, when we got the visas, we did the trip. The first day of our trip, we had a hour-and-a-half long meeting with the foreign minister, which was quite remarkable, not only because it was such a great meeting, but also because it turned out the next day he resigned. Did you hear that? You hear about the foreign minister? He resigned, but the president did not accept his resignation, and so many people in their parliament, as well as in the society in general, came back and said, no, you can't resign, we need you here. Then he came back in. But he talked to us for an hour and a half about U.S. betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. And he said, you know, we are an ancient civilization. You are a brand new one. We go back thousands of years. In fact, he said, we count in millennium. It seems like yesterday to us that the U.S. did a coup to overthrow our democratically elected government in 1953. That was like yesterday. And it is on the minds of everybody in Iran. They will not forget when the U.S., because that government in Iran wanted to nationalize the oil, the U.S. went in and engineered a coup. And then they say, since then, there have been so many other betrayals. And one of them became clear to us a couple of days later when we went to visit something called the Peace Museum. And it's run by people who had been involved in and suffered from the Iran-Iraq War that happened between 1980 and 1988, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. It was not Iran's fault. Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. And what did the U.S. do? Sided with Saddam Hussein, sold them weapons, and gave them the materials to produce chemical weapons. And these men who showed us around the Peace Museum were the victims of that. One had both his legs blown off. One had a hacking cough the whole time that he led us around. And one had tears that kept coming out of his eyes from the chemical weapons. This is since the 1980s. And they said, we remember the United States supporting Saddam Hussein during that time. We also talked to the foreign minister about his long, tedious negotiations for the Iran nuclear agreement. Negotiations that he said had been going on for over a decade, and then intensely under the Obama administration. And he talked about how they fought over every paragraph, every sentence, every word in that document, and to think that Donald Trump is going to get something else, he said, is ridiculous. That was negotiated with the entire world community, approved by the entire world community, and Donald Trump unilaterally pulls out. And what the foreign minister basically said to us is that this is destroying his reputation with the people. Because when the U.S. pulled out, it imposed these very, very harsh sanctions that are destroying people's lives. 80 million people in Iran are suffering the collective punishment of Donald Trump deciding that he didn't like the Iran nuclear deal. Why? Because Israel and Saudi Arabia didn't like the Iran nuclear deal. So 80 million people have to suffer from that. And this is called extraterritorial sanctions, where it's not just U.S. companies that are not allowed to trade. It is all companies around the world. If you want to do any business with the United States or do any business in dollars, which is over 90% of world trade, you cannot trade with Iran. And they were boasting in that hearing today how they had sanctioned over 1,000 individuals and entities for having violated the U.S. illegal pulling out of an agreement that was ratified by the United Nations. So the ones who were obeying the agreement are getting punished for it, and the Iranian people are getting punished for it. And we heard person after person telling us things like, oh, food and medicine is supposed to be exempt, but medicines are drying up because the pharmaceutical companies are afraid to send things, the banks are afraid to process, the shipping companies are afraid to ship, and the insurance companies are afraid to insure. And aside from that, people don't have money anymore, so they don't have the money to buy the stuff. And so there are all kinds of shortages now happening. And when Brian Cook, you know him, he is the special envoy of Donald Trump for Iran, but really against Iran. He spoke to AIPAC, and he got tremendous applause when he said, Iran is suffering its worst economic crisis in its 40-year history, and the people at AIPAC thought that was just fantastic. And I think, how sad, how sick, how horrible, how anti-people can you be to blame the Iranian people, 80 million people, because you don't like their government? And really this whole mantra that they always say that Iran is the #1 source of terrorism in the world is just BS. You want to tell me the #1 source of terrorism in the world?
Yes. Israel.
Okay, so some of you say Israel, some of you say the U.S., and some would say Saudi Arabia. So I think all of them would be good contenders for the #1 spot. But it really is not Iran. So there is just a drumbeat for war with Iran right now, and it's getting harsher and harsher. And in fact, those of us who are peacemakers, when some of you might know Colonel Ann Wright, who is a wonderful peacemaker, well, 26 of our people got back into the U.S. with no problem. Ann Wright and I come bringing up the rear, and lo and behold, not only do we get stopped at customs for post-secondary search, where they insist they can take and did take our electronics to take anything off of it and everything off of it that they want. And if we refused, they would be confiscated. But after that, then they told us, there are some gentlemen waiting for you over there who would like to speak to you. Anybody have a guess of who they were? The FBI. The FBI wanted to talk to us about the scary thing of a peace delegation going to Iran. Let me tell you, the Iranian people, I think, are the nicest people in the world. They're the most hospitable, the most wonderful. Everyone in our delegation, when they're approached by somebody, it would be kisses and hugs, and can you come to my house for dinner, and next time you have to stay with me, and we love Americans. But to the FBI, it was just a very, terrible thing that we had gone as a peace delegation to Iran. So there are some things that we can do about Iran. The other issue we heard from the Iranians is about the Muslim ban, because they're part of that Muslim ban, even though there has never been one Iranian who has been involved in any kind of terrorist activity in the United States. And time after time they would say, I can't go see my daughter, I can't study in the United States. The vice mayor of Tehran met with us and he said, I got my PhD from the United States and I wanted to have my son study in the United States. And he's a very party line guy, and he's not a super, well, certainly not a rah-rah US, but he thinks the US educational system is really good and he thinks exposure to the US is good. His son got into Cornell, but because the Muslim ban was not allowed to go there. And so he said, you know, it just doesn't make sense. If you want Iranians to have a back and forth and learn how great the United States is, you know, why are you keeping us out? And so there are 2 bills in Congress trying to lift the Muslim ban that we can be supporting. And there's also the issue of getting, there will be a piece of legislation soon to say we should rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement, but right now it's really important to get people on record for that, especially the presidential candidates. So we've been working very hard to have them publicly come out and put it on their platforms. And one thing that has been extremely successful that we're very excited about is that it is now in the Democratic Party's own platform to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. That's a very, very positive thing, and in fact the foreign minister knew about it and said that they were encouraged by it, and basically said that the fate of Iran is in the hands of the people of the United States. If you don't get that guy out of the White House, Iran is in big trouble and the whole world is in big trouble. And they said, and so we've managed to get, Bernie Sanders says, yes, rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. So does Elizabeth Warren, so does Tulsi Gabbard. And one person we haven't gotten, and it should be a no-brainer, is Kristen Gillibrand, because she voted for it. So we have been contacting her, and we would encourage, if there's a call that you can make tomorrow to her office, to say, please come out publicly and put it in your presidential platform that you support rejoining the Iran nuclear agreement. So just a couple of other things before I close. In the vein of positive things we can do, the work around trying to stop the U.S. support for the catastrophic war in Yemen has been extremely good work. And that is because there's a broad coalition, including lots of you here who have been hounding your senators and your congresspeople, including people from the humanitarian aid community that have seen how horrific conditions are in Yemen, including some people on the right who are against these endless wars, including the libertarian group, the Cato Institute, including the Koch brothers, believe it or not, including the group Freedom Works. There's been a very broad coalition that's been very successful, using something that hasn't been used since the time of the Vietnam War, which is the 1973 War Powers Act. And we will very soon see another vote in the House to pass it. And it's already passed in the Senate, and it passed in another version in the House, so it should pass again, and will go on the President's desk. He will probably veto this, but it sends a very, very strong message coming from the American people, going through our Congress to say, stop supporting the Saudi bombing of Yemen. Very important for us to do. And the last thing I wanted to mention is around the campaign divesting from the war machine. You have a wonderful resolution that you're trying to get your city council to pass called Move the Money. We also have a campaign where we're trying to get our congresspeople to agree not to take money from the weapons industry. And here again, like the Green New Deal, we're kind of piggybacking on the momentum from the campaign to divest from the fossil fuel industry, the campaign to divest from the private prison industry, campaigns to divest from Israeli companies. So this is another divestment campaign, very, very important, that we're getting cities to pass, we're getting universities to pass, and we're getting congresspeople to say that they will pledge not to take money from the weapons industry. And there's already a number of them that agree to that, and we need to get more, so we would like to get your help in that campaign. And I think we have Another campaign around the divest that our new Code Pink staff person will tell you about. But just before that, just to sum up by saying, this is a time of great momentum because we have the presidential campaigns coming up. And I know a lot of people are worried that you might not even support the Democrats, but you're so anxious to get Trump out. We got to get one of those Democrats, and this is a long time where people are going to beat each other up, and maybe they'll come out so bruised that Trump will get in again. And sure, I mean, there's all of those worries. But it also is a time when we can get a lot of these issues out in the open. And there's a time when we can really push on these issues. For example, Tulsi Gabbard has made ending the wars the centerpiece of her campaign. And I would say she is already helping to force Bernie Sanders to talk more about these foreign policy issues and the military-industrial complex. He has talked more about it in the little time that he has started his campaign now than he did during the entire time of his last presidential campaign. So we are making progress getting these issues out. We are making progress with our intersectionality. We are making progress in building momentum to force the members of Congress to do a better job, to represent the real values that we have as human beings, which don't include strangling people through sanctions, and the values that we have in trying to save this beautiful planet that we live on. So I encourage you, I thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and I encourage us to just keep on going and do more in the coming months ahead. Thank you.